Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad. In today's program, we are going to take a stock of the recently held wide-ranging news conference by the US President-elect Donald Trump, his first ever press conference after his landslide victory in November 5th. Presidential elections. It offered a window into what his domestic and foreign policies are going to be when he takes office on January the 20th. Specifically talking on the foreign policy front about Syria, he said nobody knows what the future holds. Regarding Gaza, he said he had very good talk with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and repeated his earlier warning, quote, all hell is going to break out if hostages are not released by the time he takes office on 20th of January, unquote. Also talking about another major hotspot in the world, Ukraine crisis. The president-elect said that he is going to talk with both the presidents, the Russian president as well as the Ukrainian president, adding, quote, we got to stop it, it's carnage, got to make a deal, unquote. Also, he had defended his pick for the health secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., will also be taking the analysis regarding his choice for some of the top cabinet positions. For that, we are honored to be joined in the studio by Dr. Nouman Sattar, American political analyst. Dr. Sattar, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Also on Skype at the same time, we are honored to be joined by Mr. G.R Baloch, former ambassador. Mr. Baloch, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show once again for this particular important topic. We really appreciate that. Let's begin the discussion with you, Dr. Sattar. Let's start from the foreign policy front. I just want your analysis regarding as to the situation in Syria. He had already said that Americans don't have to do anything with the situation in Syria. Now, during this particular wide-ranging press conference, he has said nobody knows what the future is there for Syria. What does that mean?
I think as for Syria, it's very clear that, like from his first statement that came earlier, that he thinks America should keep away, and like the US has nothing to do with the situation there. And in a way, that's something good. But it also shows that the US under Trump would like to keep away from entering conflicts, or entering conflicts that are going to continue, entering conflicts that the US would be unable to handle. And I think we have a good example in the sense that Trump handled Afghanistan, the withdrawal. He did not really wanted to continue over that. So what he has said about Syria, it clearly shows that he sees uncertainty, and of course the government there, of course, we think he won't be it won't be in favor with the US. So I think it's something I would say, if I could use the word wise on his part, to keep off in that situation where he won't be he could not shape events or the leadership there. I don't think they've been in touch, or they'll be in touch.
You just mentioned of that particular troop withdrawal from Afghanistan,
yes.
if I got you correctly. So
yes.
If he's going to be away from this particular situation as it has developed in Syria, and especially post-Assad, fall of a post-Assad regime, is it going to turn out into a similar sort of a scenario as far as the hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan at that particular time under Biden administration, the deal of which was struck under Donald Trump at that particular time? Do you find any sort of similarity that might be emanating in future regarding Syria also?
Not too much, in the sense that the US under Biden was involved in, before Biden was involved in Afghanistan, but the US has not been involved in Syria. There's one big difference. And secondly,
aren't there any US troops stationed over there?
Right.
Last time he sought to withdraw about 900 US
yes.
soldiers based in Syria, but there was a pressure from the opposition also, yes. and also from the advisory roles.
Right.
So he just took that particular decision back because of that pressure.
Right, of course it's there, but I don't think there's any pressure in this case to play a role there. And of course, knowing that I don't think the US has a role in Syria at this time, especially in this conflict, especially with involvement of Turkey and Russia. So my own feeling is...
So you are of the view that it's going to be wiser as far as the United States of America's interest is concerned. What about Syrians? If the US does not take interest into what might evolve, as what has evolved already, and what might evolve in the coming days with such a volatile situation over there with the rebels in the control, do you think it's going to be good for this future of Syria as well?
Well, it goes both ways. The US, it's not just that the US is paying lip service and the US is supporting diplomatically. It's not like that. The US has been supporting anti-Assad forces, but now Assad had sort of settled. But then Russia, I think, has played a bigger role, and still with having Assad as a, you can say, seeking asylum or whatever. In Moscow, things are much different. And also, I think US is keeping in mind a potential role by Iran and Hezbollah, etc., in the emerging situation where the rebels are like controlling the whole country, and they have sort of been accepted by the Syrian people. They have actually been welcomed by the Syrian people. So I think that keeps the US at bay, and especially the way we have seen Trump in the past. I don't think
so. Do you consider it a considerable shift from that particular policy under Biden administration? Because as soon as this particular Assad regime fell over there in Syria, there was a statement by President Joe Biden. There was a historic opportunity as well, with both risks as well as opportunities over there. So having no role at all in Syria, that shows that it's a considerable shift in the policy under Donald Trump, as far as in comparison to...
I would say, and as since you mentioned risk, I think Trump is not willing to take any risks abroad at this time.
Let me take this particular point to Mr. G.R. Baloch. Mr. Baloch, what's your understanding? What does this particular statement depict, and how, in contrast to that particular statement by incumbent President Joe Biden, this one is of the President-elect Donald Trump regarding the situation in Syria?
Such an interesting subject today, which is more into the realm of speculation, if you will, at this point of time. Because the trademark of Trump as a Trump, whether it was Trump 1, Trump 2, or no President Trump, he is a mercurial person. He's a very strong, tries to be strong as a leader, and all those, and a real master of the media projection of his personality. Whether what he says, does he mean it? We don't know, but he is a wordsmith. There's no doubt about it. When it comes to his own projection, when it comes to putting his own point of view into the public, and most of all, I think he is a great reader of the public sentiment. Now, I think probably he has gathered from the whatever public that the interventions, too many interventions in the world, have really not resulted neither in the elevation of American status nor its economy, but obviously there are many other forces, whether there are separate other centers of power within America and outside. And as far as Syria is concerned, it is directly connected to the overall strategy of Israel's existence as a viable state, as a state which has a regional balance in its favor, a country which is Jewish, a country which is, of course, a base for the Western imperial, whatever leftover policy is, and of course it definitely has a geostrategic importance for the American.
That this particular situation in Syria should be seen in regard to the overall situation in the Middle East. So when we talk about the situation that has developed over the last 1 year, especially since 7th of October 2023, as far as the situation in Gaza is concerned, now there is a statement by President-elect Donald Trump regarding the situation over there, specifically emphasizing on the release of the hostages, otherwise repeating his warning to the Palestinian resistance group that all hell is going to break out. So on one front, he's giving such a warning, and on the other, when we talk about the situation in Syria, he says America has nothing to do with it. So how do you compare both of these, if both of these things are interconnected as per your understanding, sir?
That's what I submitted before, that he is a wordsmith. So what suits him in the public to say on Syria, he says one thing. When it suits the public opinion on Gaza, he says something else. The two are not related as far as he's concerned, but definitely the two are related. The biggest beneficiary of fall of Assad, maybe, of course, some people who did not like his suppressive regime, but most of all is Israel. The regional balance of power is completely now tilted in favor of Israel. Iran is out as a player. There's a new now ally in the arena, Turkey, who has diplomatic relations with Israel. What is now left of Hamas and Hezbollah? Hardly anything in that. So I think Netanyahu has an open field, and obviously Netanyahu has all the blessings of Trump. Whatever he says in public really don't mean anything. That is my assessment.
If there isn't anything substantial, as you already mentioned, left of Hezbollah and Hamas, both, so why such a warning that all hell is going to break out? I mean, that shows that naturally there must be something that might threaten Israel in future as per the perspective of the President-elect Donald Trump. That's why he's giving such a warning. Or is it just specific to the release of the hostages? Or when we try to take the analysis of this particular part, if the hell is going to break out, what does that particularly mean as far as the situation for the common masses over there in Gaza is concerned?
Definitely, it's a rhetoric. It's a bluster. It's a threat to extract whatever he can. You see, we must not forget. We should understand that he is a person who believes in the philosophy of transaction and conditionality. So that is again a condition that if you don't release hostages, what we will make out of you, you cannot even imagine. Just what kind of word to that effect. This is all that fear and awe that the establishment, the American leaders have been kind of propagating since the Iraq invasion. So I think it echoes the same what we heard before, but definitely it works very well with his audience in Israel. It works very well with his own conservative political base in the US. But I think there is definitely going to be much more pro-Israeli policy when Trump comes. There will be definitely more, may not be a direct intervention by America sending troops and all that. But I think for me, the most important thing is what decision he makes on the US troops on the Syrian territory. Will he withdraw? If he withdraws, then yes, I think then his words do stand like verified that yes, I have nothing to do with Syria. But if they continue to support the Kurdish militia, they continue to have troops in the oil-rich region in the north and northeast. I think that means what he says he does not mean. Yep, Jawad.
So, Mr. Baloch, this particular withdrawal of the U.S. troops stationed over there in Syria during his first term, he had that very particular effort from which he backed away because of the advisory roles pressure. So by looking at this particular statement, and if he goes again making a similar sort of effort during his second term, do you think he is going to continue successfully in achieving that particular objective, or he is once again going to succumb to the pressure from the advisory roles if the advisory roles advise him on the similar lines as they advised him the last time around?
I think there's another battle that he has to fight in his own country, that he has actually declared it. The deep state he mentions, the establishment that he mentions. Now, the kind of appointments he has made, definitely they are meant to dent the control of the deep state. on the policy making, especially with regard to American troops, American interventions. But can we imagine that over 750 bases all over the world, US is going to just withdraw the next month, next year when Mr. Trump comes? No way. Such a it's a huge investment in terms of military assets, in terms of strategic assets, and in fact, in terms of economic interest of the US. So I think we should not go by what he says. In my assessment, I think there will be a halfway walk by Trump as well as the establishment, the US establishment. They will have to he has to compromise on some of his rhetoric, and the establishment will probably have to concede some of the space to him. But I think all these issues will be decided and probably would be impacted by the dynamics that develops internally between his government and the other state institutions, which definitely have a different global view. They have a different world view. So I think I like to wait for him to settle that internal battle first, and then I'll see how he unfolds whatever he is saying. Can he implement it? Yes, Jawad.
Your point is well taken. Mr. Baloch, if you allow me, I have an observation to make over here. If there is so much at stake, over 750 bases, US bases all over the world, and you don't expect them to be, wrapped just within a day or within a 24-hour span of time. And there is huge investment as per your understanding also. So, but can we draw any sort of a similarity when there was a situation that was considered to be not in the favor of the US when we talk about the situation in Afghanistan? Do you draw any similarities or any comparisons regarding the situation over here, generally in the Middle East, as well as there that used to be there in Afghanistan?
No, see, Afghanistan and Syria similarities people are drawing. But we have to be careful. Because Taliban are a different kind of a different ideology. They represent different kind of ideology, and the way they came in, the way Kabul was taken over, although through Doha Agreement, no doubt it was again through negotiations, but all of them, they knew the people who were even negotiating with them. So I think there's a little difference that the militia which has taken over Syria are too diverse. While as we know, the Taliban are mostly the Pashtun Afghan nationals.
Baloch, I see your pardon for the interjection over here. I'll come back to you to resume the discussion from here, but I'll have to go for a quick break, and after that, we'll resume the discussion here. Welcome back to Views on News, and just before heading for the break, we were discussing that wide-ranging press conference of US President-elect Donald Trump, and in the studio we are joined by Dr. Nouman Sattar. We are now joined by another participant on Skype, Dr. Karl Kaltenthaler, Professor of Political Science, University of Akron. Karl, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on this particular show to discuss this very important topic. Let's specifically talk about those things which have been talked by President-elect Donald Trump in his first presser regarding the situation in Gaza. How do you look at this particular warning when he says all hell is going to break out if the hostages held captive are not going to be released by the time he takes office on January the 20th?
So that's a very good question. How to interpret that? I interpret that principally as Trump trying to get the issue solved by the time he comes into office. And so I think he's trying to intimidate particularly the Hamas side into giving up the hostages before he inherits the problem. So he would much rather have this problem solved before he gets into office rather than have to deal with it after he gets into office. So from my perspective, I don't think he's thinking the United States is going to get directly involved with military force. This is an attempt to get what would be a very thorny and potentially embarrassing problem for him solved before he becomes president.
So, what is the likelihood? Are there any sort of chances that this particular situation, especially when we talk in terms of the hostages release, do you think that is going to be resolved before that particular much anticipated date of 20th of January?
I'm doubtful that that will happen. I think both sides have reasons to try to come up with a tenable peace agreement, but I also think both sides have very strong reasons not to. I think actually it's stronger on the Israeli side to not come up with this kind of an agreement. And the reason I say that is because I think Benjamin Netanyahu really wants to keep this war going because it's in his political interest to do so. He has made every effort to continue the war, to broaden the war from Gaza into Lebanon, into Iran, because one, his coalition partners that he depends on to stay in office are very, very right-wing and want to bring the war to the Palestinians and to the Iranians and to Hezbollah. The reason why Netanyahu is so desperate to stay in the office is if he is no longer prime minister, he could very well go to jail. So for him, continuing the war makes political sense, which means creating a deal with the Palestinians is not really in his direct interest.
So he is not going to be the prime minister and he is going to land in jail, if I got that correctly. So what does that depict? Is he going to serve as the prime minister of Israel for the rest of his life, no matter whatever the situation at home happens to be?
Because obviously he can't stay as prime minister for the rest of his life. But maybe he's thinking that, you know, he could stay on for a few more years and then something changes in the political or legal environment in Israel that gives him a way out. So he's buying time.
Right. Karl, I'll come back to you. Please stay with us. Let me take this particular point to Dr. Sattar also. Dr. Sattar, when President-elect Donald Trump talks about all hell breaking out if the hostages are not released by the time he takes office on 20th of January, when we see there's been so much damage and destruction as far as the situation in Gaza is concerned, so much loss of life, including women and children, majority of them. So after the world has seen so much of death and destruction over there, is there still some more of a hell that could be witnessed or seen when the president-elect talks in that manner, of whom the Muslims and Arabs, particularly during the election campaign, had high hopes? Perhaps when he is going to come, there is going to be highly likely chances of peace coming to the Middle East, especially for the people in Gaza, and there is going to be a discontinuity of the policy of the Biden administration.
Okay, I'm glad you asked the question because I had a comment on this. When he says this, Trump, President-elect Trump, I think he means it. Because in his case, we can gauge that he means what he says. So when he says this, I think it can take two forms. One is, suppose Hamas does not agree to release the hostages. Mm-hmm. There are two options. One, a more intense bombing campaign by Israel supported by the US, or the US itself could resort to bombing, or maybe just to put pressure on Hamas. US has done it in Syria, and US could do it here in case, because there is great pressure on Netanyahu for the release of hostages.
If the US gets directly involved in this particular conflict, what are going to be the ramifications for the US itself as far as its prestige in the Committee of Nations is concerned? Because under Biden administration, the kind of unequivocal support and the relentless support the Biden administration had shown towards Israel, so how is it going to play out for the international prestige for the US?
Before that, very quickly, the situation you mentioned in Gaza, of course, the level or magnitude of death, destruction, etc. I don't think Trump is or was really bothered by that, because he never mentioned, even during his campaign or even after, peace in Gaza. US has been, he was sort of supporting whatever Israel was doing. So he was not really bothered. And of course, I don't think that his stance has changed. But in terms of involvement, I'm just saying this as not as an option, but in case the hostages are not out, as we just talked with the American professor, by the time he comes to office, because he would not want to deal with such a situation. And also it's like an added burden for him, because he has to deal with Ukraine, he has to deal with Russia in that context. And of course, he is concerned about what happens to Israel and Israel's position in Gaza. And of course, he has full support for whatever Netanyahu is doing. So I don't think it does really matter, because the whole, I'm sure the Muslim community in the US and in the Middle East are waiting for him to come out with something. But I don't think he has anything sort of what we call a diplomatic solution in mind. What he has is like what we call like in a kinetic form. So I don't think he's really much bothered by world opinion, or even Netanyahu is not bothered, because there are huge protests, but he's hardly bothered. And Trump is, I think, fully supporting him in whatever he does.
Right. Let me once again go towards Karl. Karl, when we talk about the situation in Syria, we have seen President-elect talking in terms of having nothing to do with the situation in Syria, also saying that nobody knows what the future is going to be as the situation in Syria is concerned. What does he mean when he says that no role of the US altogether as far as the situation in Syria, or the prospects of any government as it takes form after this particular span of the interim government over there has passed in March?
So I think he's trying to signal to his base, but he's also a firm believer in this himself, that he doesn't want to get involved in another conflict. And he's been pretty consistent in his attitude towards Syria, saying that Syria is death and sand. That's how he looks at Syria. So he doesn't want to be involved there. He wants that to play itself out. I'm not sure who he's looking to help stabilize Syria. One of the big concerns in the US right now in the national security establishment is what happens with ISIS in Syria now. Does ISIS use this as an opportunity to break out? And so one of the key questions is, will Trump double down on his attitude about pulling US forces out of Syria when ISIS has the chance of potentially using this opportunity to break out? So that will be very interesting to watch.
Can't we make, Karl, I seek your part of the interjection over here, by looking at this particular statement, can't we get to a conclusion, perhaps, that this particular statement depicts that he is going to make an effort to withdraw those troops from Syria?
Yeah, I think he wants to withdraw those troops from Syria. I think he would probably also want to withdraw US troops from Iraq. These are things that, he stressed pretty consistently during his campaign. He wants the United States out of what he calls forever wars. He wants us to kind of withdraw from the interventions that we've been involved with overseas. This is even possible in Asia Pacific region, where the United States and China are very much in a strategic competition with each other. So this seems to be consistent with him. I do take him at his word when he says that he would like to pull out of some of these conflicts. The problem is that Syria is more of a danger to the US right now than it was, say, just a month ago.
Right. So what about what we just talked of, that strategic competition between China and the United States of America? What about the crisis in Ukraine? He has talked, there is a likelihood of him talking to both the presidents, Ukrainian president and the Russian president, saying we got to stop it, it's carnage, and got to make a deal. And if he is going to be instrumental in getting a deal done between the two sides in order to resolve that particular conflict, so in that particular sort of a scenario, who is going to be the likely winner out of the two?
Oh, I think it's without question that it will be Russia. The Ukrainians really have very little leverage over Trump right now. They're trying desperately to get their message to him that they need U.S. support, continuing it at least as it is now, if not more U.S. support. I'd be very surprised if that support continues if Ukraine doesn't agree to the terms that Trump wants to give the Ukrainians about a peace deal. And right now, those terms look like that Russia will keep the territory that it is occupied in its invasion, and also that Ukraine will not be allowed into NATO for the foreseeable future. These are two things that Ukraine would not agree to. These are kind of non-starters for the Ukrainian government. But if they're faced with a situation where Trump says, okay, you either accept these things or we're going to cut off all aid to you, the Ukrainians don't have much of a choice.
Right. Let me take this point to Dr. Sattar also. Dr. Sattar, Ukrainians don't have much choices as Karl thinks of. What's your understanding? In that sort of a scenario, when there are certain conditions, President-elect Donald Trump is going to put forth as far as reaching a resolution of this crisis is concerned.
I think there's a problem we see in Ukraine, the conflict today. Ukraine, the people, the government, it won't back down and Russia won't back off. So it's going to be a very difficult situation for Trump to handle. He would talk, of course, he would talk to both the sides, both the presidents, but it is between Zelensky and Putin. And I don't think if it goes against Russia's like long-term agenda and Ukraine's, you can say, interest, both of them would not really come to terms or agree to whatever Trump is saying. So I think that's Trump's biggest test, how to end that conflict if he wants to. Of course, he's keen that that conflict ends because, and of course, let's keep in mind, NATO has a involvement there or a role there in this conflict, being part of NATO.
So what could be the possible scenarios if President-elect Donald Trump is serious in resolving this particular issue and reaching a sort of a deal and stopping that particular carnage as he terms it? So what could be the likely possible scenarios that he could come up with some sort of conditions that could be acceptable to both the sides?
You mean Ukraine?
Both the sides, Ukraine and Russia.
Right. I think basically Ukraine is really counting on Western support, and US has been supplying arms and all that to Ukraine for a long time. I think there's one big you can say carrot that Ukrainians, if it's pulled back, then I think they're going to. I don't think even the Western countries or NATO countries or European countries are going to continue support like they are doing if Trump pulls back. So that's one thing I think that would make a difference, but we have to see.
Okay, Karl, what likely sort of a relationship can we expect when it comes to the U.S. under President Donald Trump in his second term and NATO, and the kind of talk he's been doing regarding as to the kind of finances or that NATO owes towards the larger organization, as well as vis-a-vis this particular Ukraine conflict?
So I think it's unclear. One of the things that I say is consistent about Trump is that he's unpredictable. He has said that he looks at NATO as essentially kind of a ripoff for the United States. The United States is being taken advantage of by many of the NATO countries that don't spend what they're obligated to spend. But one of the things that we've seen is since the first Trump administration, there have been countries that have significantly increased their spending. Some have not, many have, particularly countries that are on the periphery of Russia, Ukraine. They very, very much fear Russian invasion or Russian aggression of some form. So one of the things that I think about Trump is that he looks at NATO as a potential entanglement for the United States. So if Russia invades a country, say a Baltic country, would the United States come to defend that country? I'm not sure Donald Trump looks at it as an interest of the United States to go to defend Latvia or Lithuania or Estonia. He just doesn't look at it that way. I think Trump has a very, very different set of red lines compared to, say, all other preceding presidents, Republican or Democrat, in terms of what would get the United States involved in armed conflict. He looks at the United States' core interests as essentially keeping our money at home and staying out of conflicts, which has been very different than the kind of policy consensus in Washington since World War II, which has seen the United States' role as being a global stabilizer, and it's been in our interest to try to keep trade open, conflict settled, that kind of thing. but Trump doesn't view
Right, Carl. Now, specifically talking about that particular narrative that is built during his election campaign regarding the illegal immigrants over there in the United States of America, also promising that he's going to undertake one of the largest deportation drives in the history of the United States of America. Do you think this particular nomination to be the border czar, Thomas Homan, if I'm correct on this, is the right choice, and that particular promise is going to be fulfilled once he takes office?
So one of the things that we've seen with Trump's nominations across the board is that clearly in this administration, he's looking for loyalty above all else. So he's looking for people who are going to execute his policy agenda. So he's picked hardliners on many issues. It's a very different set of nominations than we had in the first administration, where he went for people who he thought kind of shared his worldview, but he was also looking for people that were viewed as competent, that to some degree the establishment would accept. This time around, he doesn't care at all what the establishment thinks. He wants to make sure that there's people in there who will listen to his orders. Because in the first administration, there were people who did not listen to his orders. They just ignored them. So if Trump wants a hardline immigration policy, he's going to get a hardline immigration policy. The problem for him is going to be the legal challenges that will come for that. And those are almost whether he can actually do what he says he wants to do with illegal immigrants, that totally remains to be seen.
Your point is well taken, Dr. Karl Kaltenthaler, professor of the Political Science University of Akron. Thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. In the studio, we were joined by Dr. Nouman Sattar, American political analyst. Dr. Sattar, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.